In July of 2020, OnePlus launched a brand to appeal to a lower budget, the Nord. They said that there will be more versions, and in November of 2020, we got two devices. The better one being this, the OnePlus Nord N10 5G, though this specific US version didn't get launched until 2021. This is OnePlus' attempt at a true budget 5G phone, as well as the intro to the current three Nords that are in America, and personally, I'm not a fan. But we can't immediately write this off as a bad phone because I'm not part of the demographic that this phone is made for. Also, there are used versions that can be found under $100, like this $88 one. Instead, I will tell you about my experience using the OnePlus Nord N10 5G and tell you whether or not you should buy one in 2022. Hello everyone, this is Matt from Real World Review. Socials are listed above, and now let's get down to business. As it may seem obvious, this phone is disappointing to me. But if you're the average person looking for a phone in this price point, then this phone might seem fitting. To power this phone, we get a Snapdragon 690 processor with 6GB of RAM paired with 128GB of UFS 2.1 storage, which is expandable, of course. It is a budget phone. Think somewhere in between Snapdragon 835 and Snapdragon 845 chip, or like a Pixel 4a, non-5G. The performance works, but there are some apps that will hang when opening. Gaming is alright too, nothing too major, but we do run into a few issues. The phone gets hot fairly easily and doesn't really push all that heat out properly because of the plastic build. The other issue is the battery. On this one, it is a 4300 mAh cell. We don't get wireless charging, which is not surprising, but we do get 30 watts of wired charging thanks to Warp Charge. It's actually pretty fast for a cheap Android phone, but the reason is because the battery is miserable. Very low battery life thanks to that 5G signal, but it also may be because of the processor not being optimized properly. And yes, even with 60Hz, the battery life doesn't get that much better. Moving outside of the phone, we do get some nice things. The top has a microphone, while the right side has the lonely power button, and the left side is where the volume buttons are and SIM card tray, which is paired with the memory card slot. Then on the bottom we get the headset jack, another microphone, a USB-C 2.0 port, and the second loudspeaker, which is kind of surprising for this price point. The front of the phone is a Gorilla Glass 3 slab with a hole for the front camera in the corner, and then the second loudspeaker on the very top. For a budget phone, it doesn't sound that bad and actually has a stereo feel, which is very impressive to me. On the back, we get the little area for the two useless cameras and the two useful cameras, with the somewhat middle ground of an LED flash. The back itself is a plastic cover, just like the trim in the midframe, and the fingerprint scanner. Really, the screen and camera cover is glass, the camera trim and top speaker grill is metal, and the rest of the phone is plastic. While this is a larger phone, so is the weight, being 190 grams, but the plastic build definitely makes it feel lighter than it really is. Overall, it's a decent build for a budget phone, and it kind of makes sense, but I still feel like some older flagship phones would be a better choice compared to this phone. Except for the fact that this is a 5G phone. No ultra-wideband support, of course. While the screen isn't anything special, that's one of the reasons why I need to talk about it. This is a 6.49-inch IPS LCD that has a 1080p resolution with a pixel density of 405 pixels per inch. The interesting thing is that it is a 90Hz display, but it's actually one of the worst screens that I've seen in a while. Similar to the Essential phone, the screen just feels too bright, and it kind of reminds me of raising the brightness on a monitor too high. At around 400 nits, the backlight isn't really the best, and the image quality could use some work. Having used this Motorola here as comparison, I see that the images look even better on this one, and it's just an LCD display. Then the refresh rate is set to 90Hz, but visually feels like it dips below 60 frames per second a lot. I turned off 90Hz and went down to 60Hz and only noticed a very slight difference, whereas my OnePlus 7 Pro does drop below 90Hz and 60Hz every once in a while, but not as much as this phone. It's a strange feeling, and adding 90Hz is a plus, but it has to hit that consistently for it to be a true bonus, rather than a boost on a spec sheet. As for using the screen though, not too bad. It is very responsive and cheap to fix if you do break the screen, both things that are kind of a concern in this price point. We do get double tap to wake and sleep, though the former is hit or miss. We don't get an always on display, but we do get this ambient display, but the operation feels kind of clunky and sometimes doesn't even activate. I didn't want to make this section for the screen, but it feels kind of right to explain the issues that I had with the brightness of the image as well as the refresh rate. Similar to the screen, the cameras are there. Again, not a flagship, so don't expect flagship grade. There are 3 real sensors on this phone. One if you want to count sensors I would actually use, but a total of 5 cameras throughout the whole phone. There's no optical image stabilization, just electronic for video. The main camera is a 64 megapixel sensor, one that is capable of 4K video at 30 frames per second. Though it's 64 megapixels, images look old, almost like OnePlus spent a couple hours on sensor optimization and then called it a day. Again, for normal people that buy this, it'll be fine, but not for those that want an awesome camera or think 64 megapixels is really good. We get an 8 megapixel ultra-wide sensor, which looks alright, but similar to the 64 megapixel sensor, colors look flat. At 119 degrees, the image looks fairly wide, but is lacking in image quality. Then we get a 2 megapixel macro lens, which looks worse than you would think, often being dramatically worse than the normal sensor when you zoom that in. Then we get a 2 megapixel monochrome, which I have no idea how to use. Essential did a really bad job with the 13 megapixel one that they put in that phone, so I could only imagine how terrible 2 megapixels would be if I can even use it. It's honestly kind of dumb that they didn't just make 2 sensors on the back, but having 4 sounds better, right? Well, here's some pictures. Judge away. As for the front camera, it is a 16 megapixel sensor that reminds me of other 16 megapixel OnePlus devices. Looks alright for video calls, but who is using this for selfies? Not to mention that the front camera video is nowhere near vlogging quality with 1080p at a max of 60 frames per second. But that is technically higher than the OnePlus 7 Pro. Actually, they could have just thrown the much nicer $9 triple sensor array from the OnePlus 7 Pro and called it a day. But what do I know? Now for me, this phone doesn't make sense at all. The LCD screen is a low quality one, just like the cameras and processor speeds, but I guess that's fine. At a launch price of $300, this is not a good deal, but now it's pretty decent at around $100. And that's where things start to look up. We get Android 11 on this phone with some fairly recent security updates, which may or may not continue moving forward. We get expandable storage, a headset jack, and a decent 128 gigabytes of built-in storage. There's no water resistance or wireless charging, but 30 watts of wired charging is pretty fast, with modern Pixel phones of the time being almost half of that charging speed. Even with something like the iPhone 13 Pro Max, it can't even charge that fast. We get a fingerprint sensor and face unlock, both that work fairly fast. They're not the best, but they still work pretty fast. The dual speaker setup still blows my mind because of the fact that it's a budget-focused phone, and it has a dual speaker setup. While the Motorola Razr and Samsung Z Flip and Z Flip 5G only had one loudspeaker. The biggest issues that I have are the speed and battery life. But waiting for an app to open, I guess, is better sometimes for your mental health, while the battery part is acceptable because charging speeds are fairly fast. The best parts of this phone to me are the extras and the software, something that lots of companies fail to do at this price point. Overall, this is a phone that I'm happy to move from, but at a cheap price, should you buy it? I can't really give you a solid answer because battery life and camera seem crucial to being a good phone, at least in my eyes, but it still isn't a terrible budget phone. To be fair though, I don't want to deal with any other Nord phones if they're this bad. I'll just do what I normally do and stick to the numbered or Pro ones. And that's the end of my review of the OnePlus Nord N10 5G, the first of the cheap OnePlus phones. But what do you think? Did I miss the point of this phone? Let me know in the comment section or socials listed above, and as always, thanks for watching.